Good morning, everybody. I'm amazed at the attendance in this room. We feel very special and honored that you all want to be at the Parental Progress Workshop. My name is Suzanne. This is my colleague and friend Sam. We're going to be guiding you on this journey today. So thank you again for being here. The purpose for this workshop is because there was a lot of inconsistency around the state, a lot of confusion about how to make the finding on parental progress. So today we're going to be talking about timelines, we're going to be talking about some terminology, we're going to be talking about specific criteria about how we make the finding on parental progress. We're going to begin with a panelist presentation that represents DHS child welfare, judicial, legal, and treatment perspectives. Then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll tie it all together to the CRB process and to our findings. And we'll have a chance to practice some case synopses and to go through some exercises. I want to remind you, one, because this workshop is being recorded, but also two, because of time constraints, if you have a question for one of the panelists, please use one of the note cards as we discussed yesterday. Write your question down. We will collect them and we will ask questions at the end of the panelist discussion. Okay? So I'm going to have Sam introduce our panelists and we'll get going.
Okay, well, thank you again for attending this workshop. My name is Sam Dasmal, one of the Citizen Review Board staff, and some of you may know me from the work we do. I'd like to introduce today the panel that we have. We have Michelle Lansdowne. She's a caseworker with the Department of Human Services. She has several years of experience in different capacities with child welfare. And also her background includes special education and nursing. Then we have Linda Lawin, who is a supervisor with the Department of Human Services. And again, she's also worked in different capacities with the Department of Human Services and has many years of experience. Then we have Gary Hurd, who is currently a program supervisor with Marion County Alcohol and Drug Treatment Services, and he's also a certified alcohol and drug counselor. Then we have Lindsay Soto, who is has been in private practice in the area of juvenile and family law, and is part of the Juvenile Advocacy Consortium. And then finally we have Rebecca Orff, who's a senior judge and a staff attorney for the Oregon Judicial Department for issues involving violence. And with that, we'll turn it to our panelists. First, we have Michelle.
Oh, okay. Can you hear? Yep. Okay. Again, Michelle Lansdowne from DHS Child Welfare, and I am a caseworker in the teen unit. Kind of a misconception because my caseload runs from about 8 years old to 21 years of age. And I guess I want to first preface that in making the decision on any parental progress is very case specific. Today I'll talk about a little bit more generalized, and the fact that every parent progresses at a different rate. I mean, based on their cognitive functioning, the supports that they have, and honestly their motivation. You would think having children in care would be a motivator, but for some parents that's not really the case. So I guess when I'm looking at assessing parental progress, I'm doing it from the first moment I meet them. I'm either coming in from a CSM, a child safety meeting, they're coming in from CPS, this is the first time I've met the parents, but they've also been working with DHS for about 30 days. They've already been to a shelter hearing, maybe even a jurisdictional hearing. And when I'm talking with them, I guess one of the first things that I'm looking at is to ask them why their kids are in care. And if the answers I'm getting that, well, you know, DHS found 2 cans of, empty beer cans sitting on my TV, opposed to 2 predatory sex offenders living in the home with their 4 kids, I think we've got some work to do on that. But then we also have that ability. We have so many assessments that we can utilize. The psych, the neuropsych, the psychosexual, but as a caseworker, that's a snapshot for us. That's not an all-ending, and I kind of look at those as a twofold. What I utilize them for is that not only am I looking at what the professional is seeing, and again, understanding it's a snapshot, but after that, what I tend to do with most of my parents, unless there's special circumstances, is going over that individually with them, sitting down, looking at the psychological. And what I'm looking at is, and this is the instructions I give them, I want them to take this home, and I want them to look at what they agree with and what they disagree with, and then what do we need to do, what they agree with, what do we need to do to get to where we need. And when a parent can come back and articulate, I agree with this and this and this, and these are the things I need to do, that also is a measure of progress. And the parent, again, who comes back and says, we're back at square one, you know, DHS doesn't like me, I don't agree with this, you know, the doctor got wrong information, you know, I have to look at that progress, that we're still at a point where the information is being presented and they're very resistant to that. But that's also that part of change. When I look at a parent who has lower cognitive functioning, when I am assessing their progress, maybe there's something I'm missing. And that's where I go back to my supervisor, because a person who has an IQ or a processing speed of 65 is not going to get that information. And I've given them, we've sent them to classes that should be helping improve or at least build their parental capacity. And on that, matter of fact, I put on the website the PCA, the Parental Capacity Assessment, and that's a lot of what we look at in the very beginning, besides building that rapport with the parents, which is absolutely crucial. But again, the assessments, I tend to use, like I said, twofold. Parent and child interactions. There's nothing better than having that assessment, but there's also nothing better than putting those parents in the van and the children in the van and driving to Portland, and you're there with them for 8 hours. As you're crossing the street, are they keeping their children safe? When the child melts down after 6 hours because this has been a long day, are they demonstrating what they learned in their parenting classes? Are they listening to the information that's being given to them? Just how they interact with children, that's invaluable. You can't just take an assessment and say this is what I'm basing my decision on. And that includes UAs. Again, each one of that is a snapshot. It's what the parents do with that information. One of the other, I guess some of the examples for me is that I have parents where we kind of look outside of the box. The parent has not made progress, not sufficient progress. But I also look at that in comparison to the child's needs. I have children who are at the highest level of psychiatric care. And that parent has taken collaborative problem solving, the explosive child. They've done everything that we've asked of them to do. But unless I can take them up to a therapist level or hire 24/7 staff, that child is still too violent to come home. And it's not a lack of what the parent is doing. And again, realizing that we're never stopping. This child may not be able to go home for a year or two, but the parent is still engaging with the agency. We have maybe even have gone to APLA status, but that parent is still engaging in the system. And again, when I'm looking at parental progress, that speaks volumes for me, is because the carrot's not there. They're not going home in 2 months. But they're understanding that they still have to keep working for that child. When we go to court, I have to be able to articulate progress or lack of progress. And I know that that becomes the part where sometimes you do have a gut feeling. You can't run on your gut feeling if you can't articulate it. But that does not mean when you walk back into your supervisor's office and you've got a very difficult case, that you have a I'll give an example, and it's not a true case, but it's close. You'll have a child who's getting ready to, or trying to go home. We're trying to get this parent home, and all of a sudden, for some reason, the parent completely disappears. And we bring back in, all of a sudden, a parent that's maybe, we haven't terminated rights, but the parent's relinquished rights. And they step back in. We're thinking outside of the box. The parent is starting to demonstrate that they want to be a part of this child's life. But again, the rights are terminated. That does not mean that we don't start to work with that parent too. It may look different. They may not even be a party to the case, but this is something that we're going to start working towards. And unfortunately, you can do that for a year because there's nobody else stepping up. You've looked at all the other promising parents or family members, and you staff with your supervisor because you have a gut feeling that maybe something's not still right here. And that's the night that you get the call from the child because you've actually allowed an overnight visit, and they're in the closet calling you going, my mom told me to lie to you. And that's not something that you can predict, plan. The parent has gone and jumped through the hoops because they know that's what they're supposed to do, because this is the 6th child that we've removed from them. They know the words to speak, and they know what sounds good, and I tend to start with my parents as, I know you love your child. That doesn't ever tend to not be a part of it. Unfortunately, we've had some cases where I've had parents come in and want to relinquish rights the first day we see them. And that also is you're working with that parent in quite a different way. But I think that so many cases are case-by-case basis, but making the decision is based on not just what you see, what you're reading. You guys get a tremendous amount of information. But what is also important is what's on the notes, the FACES notes, or, like I said, being able to articulate to a judge or to you why this child is not going home, or why we're looking at another parent over versus one that your guys are going, wait a minute, this is a really good, viable parent, but we know information on them that makes us leery. And again, for me, I always go back to square one. But I also never, ever stop looking at the needs of the child and looking at the progress of the parent, because again, progress of the parent doesn't always mean that they can meet the needs of the child. So I think in the long run, that's for me is one of those most important things as a caseworker. And as what you do, that there has to be, it has to be looked at as a whole, that negative UAs is not just an indication of parents' progress. An evaluation that states that the parent gives us glowing report is not a complete reason for that child to go home. It has to be the whole picture. So I think in the long run, to me as a caseworker, those are the things that I have to look at as a whole. And the more time I get to spend with the parent and the family away from the agency, the more I can make that decision. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there are lots of questions already, so please say them till the end, write them on the card, and we'll collect them. And next we have Linda Lauren.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here today to talk with you about parental progress, and I can understand why there's such a large group here, because after all, this is exactly what it's all about, the progress that parents can make to safely get the children back home to them. It's huge, and there's a lot of ways, of course, of measuring parental progress. And for many years, we looked at the strengths and needs, the strengths of the parents and the needs of the children. But as I'm sure all of you know, we now have the Oregon Safety Model, which has given us a tool to help us measure, based a lot more on facts of what's going on than previously, and that's been really a great step forward, I think, for child welfare, because we have what's called the conditions for return, which actually is a way to have children get home, hopefully quickly, because after all, I think the worst thing for a child is, first and foremost, to be unsafe and to have harm done to them, but second, to have to be in foster care, because children do want to be home with their parents. And so conditions of return gives us a way to really try to bring in other people, safety service providers, hopefully oftentimes their relatives, to be able to place the child back with the parents before they've actually made changes, if it can be done safely with safety service providers in the home that are aligned with the agency and understand the safety threats, and that can present a sustainable plan. It can't just be someone that maybe will be helpful for a week or two, but someone that's really willing to commit to being our safety service providers and helping to ensure that the children are safe. So that's really kind of outside of the scope of making progress. How we measure progress is looking at our expected outcomes for parents, which at the very beginning of the case, the caseworker does a protective capacity assessment, and that assessment's always changing as the parents make progress, but it helps us to assess where their enhanced capacities are, their strengths, and where their diminished capacities lie, and that helps us to know what kinds of services to help the parents get into to hopefully enhance those diminished capacities. And so as we move through the case, we continue to look at that. A lot of times in staffing cases with my caseworkers, they'll say, you know, I just don't know. I don't know if this parent's really truly at a point where they're stable enough where we should start transitioning the children home. And I'll say, let's look at conditions for return. Let's look at the expected capacities. What's happening here? And so that gives us a tool to measure, and it's helpful. Now, oftentimes, you know, what we really need to look at is focusing on how the safety threats are being alleviated, to make sure that child's going to be safe. That's our focus. And sometimes, you know, caseworkers can want the parent to become this really proficient parent, and that's not the issue. The issue is, can they alleviate those safety threats and have the children return to them? That's the issue, and that's what we have to go back and focus on. And some of the ways we can measure parental progress are basically in the actions that the parents take, how motivated they truly are. And some of those actions are visitation. Do they come to visits? And do they engage with their children when they're at visits? Do they come to visits on time? Do they come to visits consistently? There's studies that have shown that parents that consistently visit with their children and really want to visit with their children are most likely to have their children returned home to them. They are most likely to be successful because they are putting their children as a priority in the action of coming to those visits and engaging with those children and asking for more visits, and asking, how can I see my children more? What can I do to make that happen? That shows a real sign of desire to make their children a priority. Their attitude tells us a whole lot, and it's really nice and rewarding to see attitudes change as caseworkers are able to engage and build rapport with clients. A lot of times we'll see attitudes change because they'll come to realize that we're not the enemy, and that we truly want to help them and we truly want to support them. But they have to meet us halfway, at least, really way more than halfway, but they have to do the work. We're here to remove the barriers and help them get into the services to address the safety threats. Another way to measure progress truly is, what kind of support system does the parent have? That is huge. If a parent doesn't have any relatives or much of a support system, it makes it very difficult for them to succeed. And oftentimes, the agency is their only support system, and we can truly be a support system. And then there's the issue of honesty. That is such a huge issue with our parents, because they often don't trust us, and they often aren't honest, and it's such a barrier. I mean, it's hard to really work with a parent that you feel is not being honest, because you don't know then, even if they're going to all the services, you don't know if they're genuine, and if the children return, if if things have really changed. That it's so frustrating to work with a client or a parent that you really have a pretty good idea they're not being honest with you. So that's a barrier to progress. And then, of course, walking the walk is really important. When you see, it's not so much what parents say, it's what they do. It's walking the walk. It's seeing that they understand that they can't really be, say, in a relationship right now, because they really need to make their child a priority, and having the child return to them a priority. They get it. They get that, and that's walking the walk. They understand that they need to go to recovery meetings, AA or NA meetings, on a regular basis, and remain engaged in the recovery program long after they've left treatment. Those are some of the ways that we measure progress, is how truly engaged are they. And so often we will see parents that go to, therapy and to treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, but they're just jumping through the hoops, as Michelle talked about. They're just jumping through the hoops, and it's really just compliance. And it's really, that makes it tough, because, it makes it hard, because you don't have, in a way, a reason not to return the children, but you know that they're not truly engaged, and that if we return the children home, they're likely to be coming back into care. And that is very traumatic for children, very, very traumatic. And so that makes that piece, the honesty piece, is just so key. Let's see. I think that's really all I have to say for now.
So during reviews, obviously you have the DHS representatives, and then oftentimes you either have reports from some of the services that parents participate in, or you have actual providers at the table. So to speak more about services, some of the services that the parents engage in is Mr. Gary Hurd.
Good morning. Again, my name is Gary Hurd. I'm the program supervisor for Marion County Alcohol and Drug Treatment Programs. And we have a multitude of programs. Marion County has invested and grown immensely in treatment services. But specifically for this, ITRS, Intensive Treatment and Recovery Services, is a program that was developed or the funding anyway, was developed in collaboration between Addictions and Mental Health and DHS, and it was to build a bridge between when children are taken out of the home because of addiction issues. And now the parents, there's lots of things that the parents need to engage in and need to do. And one of them is to get into treatment and get into services and start working on their issues, start working on their addiction issues. And then once the child's gone, then the Oregon Health Plan is gone in many cases. Then they cannot afford treatment, but yet they can afford treatment, but yet they're expected to be into treatment. So it was an endless cycle going round and round and round. And ITRS was put in place to build that bridge. Folks that are within the DHS system, and DHS system, either a child taken out of the home, that is not one of the criteria, but actually in the DHS system can enter into treatment without cost to them. When a client is referred and from the DHS worker, or even themselves seeking for services, the first thing that happens is that they're assessed. They have an appointment. They're hooked up with an assessing counselor, and it's a pretty involved process. And what's identified at the end is they have what's called a master problem list that's developed. And throughout the assessment, there's like 6 different categories that's looked at. And the information that's collected, that list is developed. They are placed with a primary counselor, and a mentor is one of the next things that happens. And we have lots of services don't have what's called a mentor program. It's like there's so much information to talk about. It's like, where do you start, you know? When they get through the assessment process, there are some groups that they are scheduled for. We have groups such as Women Seeking Safety, which looks at trauma and abuse issues. We have Men's Process, Men's Relapse Prevention. We have Parenting from the Heart, where folks that maybe have never had any parenting skills, they're going off the skills that their father and mother got from their father and mother, and on, and there's really never been any development of that. So, and they go into lots of women's services. We have alumni. We also have a clinic advisory committee that the clients and the individuals actually participate in with staff. So once they are placed in various groups according to what the assessing counselor sees as their need, they're hooked up with a mentor and a primary counselor. What helps us to assess on how they're doing, I believe we're pretty similar to what was talked about with DHS. As soon as they come in the door, we're assessing what's going on with them. More times than not, they come in intoxicated. More times than not, they come in where they've just used. They may have used in the parking lot before they come in. They have lost the ability to not use. Regardless, children are at risk, regardless of their jobs, regardless of what, that addiction, that drug, that alcohol becomes everything. And we are assessing that. We're looking at that when they come in. And they're hooked up with a mentor. What's kind of a gold mine with mentors is they have a counselor and they go to their groups, their assigned groups, and they participate and they start to, appears to be participating and engaging in to the services and what's asked of them. But they hook up with mentors. Mentors go out into the communities with them. They go out and go to meetings. They help them hook up for if they have housing needs, if they need as much as a food box, AFS, all the different services. All these mentors have different things that they do, and they hook up with the client, engage them into the community. At any given time, the mentor will go by their house and just say, hey, how are you doing? I'm here. Let's go to a meeting. Let's do what have you. And that is really kind of like the extension of the arm of the counselor. So many times you just had to go with what they're saying in group, what's going on, going through the hoops. Absolutely. It's like, how do you know? They've learned well to play the game, so to speak. But with mentors and being able to go out into the community more, we're able to see what's going on. What does their environment look like? Is it clean? Is it not? Who they associate with? Do they go to meetings? Do they go to meetings and sit there? Do they go to meetings and participate? There's a whole gamut of things. Treatment lasts. It is way individualized. Every individual that comes through there has different needs and have different histories. So treatment can last anywhere from 6 months to a year. We've had some folks up to 18 months in outpatient services. And we don't let it be dollar-driven treatment, which happens a lot. If a person's not there, or they have things to work on, or they seem to be balanced and seem to be stabilizing, but now there's some other things happening, we continue their services. In lots of cases, while our folks are in treatment, they're able to get their children back. And they strive for that. That's a big focus. But as they progress in treatment and you start to see them engage and they start to identify, it's like, oh, wow, this is why I think the way I do. And those lights start to go on. Getting the kids back isn't necessarily a primary focus anymore. They start to turn that their primary focus is, wow, I'm going to do something different in life today. And when they get the kids back, it's such a huge success that we keep them in treatment at least another 2 or 3 months, because when they have the children back and now they have been out of custody for a while, or they've been out of the home for a while, there's a lot of stressors. There's a lot of relapse triggers. There's lots of things that can happen. So they are kept in the services. So to be sure stabilization is happening, to make sure the transition is going well. And also what's great with our ITRS, and I think it's a what do I want to say, a kind of a breaking thing, is that ITRS and DHS work very closely together with these folks. We actually have staffing that we want once a month, that all the counseling staff and the DHS workers, all the case workers, we come together for an afternoon, and they're able to talk. They're able to sit across the table. They're actually talk. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what's going on. And then the caseworker will say, well, that's interesting because this is what I'm seeing, and here's what's going on here. So together, we're able to assess what's happening, I think, at a far more productive than ever has been. So many times, DHS, treatment services can be kind of separated in their views, can be kind of, well, I think they're doing this, but no, I think they're doing this. We're able to sit down at the table and do for the common good for the individual, which is what we want, we want family health. We want reunification. We want a healthy family. That's what we want. There's lots of things that they have to accomplish when they're coming through ITRS before they're going to graduate. They have to, everyone, before graduation, all staff, we have regular staff meetings. Everyone has to go through, each counselor has to present their client that's up for graduation, and there's things that they have to be in compliance with that they have had to have done, such as, do they have a sponsor? What's their community support? Do they do church? Do they not? Is church the only thing? What else are they doing? How have they been working with their mentor? The sober living environment. Again, what are they doing in their environment? Are they doing things that are conducive to their recovery? What are they doing? At least a minimum of 90 days clean. Are they employed? Are they working? Are they have a stable source of income? Are they working on getting off cash assistance? Are they working on what are you doing? Again, like I said, 2 months. If this child is coming home, at least have they still been in treatment for the last 2 or 3 months? They have a very detailed relapse prevention plan that they need to present. What's their outside meeting attendance like? Are they going to meetings? Are they regularly attending, or are they coming up with excuses? And there seems to be all kinds of reasons why I can't make that meeting tonight. They have plans. Do they have plans? Do they decide, okay, I'm going to continue with the mentor group, even though I'm going to get out of treatment, I'm going to graduate. Do I plan to continue working with some folks? Because we have extended services. We have alumni, and we have the mentor group that they can still come to. Are they willing to do that? Do they do that? Are they taking it upon themselves to have a self-directed recovery program, and are they doing that? Are they willing to do that? One of the big things that we do they have a satisfactory working relationship with their DHS worker? Or is it, this is what DHS did to me, and this is the only reason I'm sitting here? Well, that's not going to quite cut it, because no, you need to look at your accountability. Are you responsible for your disease because you have your disease? No. Are you accountable to it? Absolutely. Absolutely. medical health stability, and their UAs. Are they clean? I mean, we UA regularly, and we do ETGs, which is the alcohol test, where 80 hours within 80 hours we can tell if they've been drinking or not, and the combination with DHS giving random UAs, we have a pretty reasonable knowledge if they're clean at that certain point, plus their behavior. So treatment can be complex and very intensive, and they have some things they have to do. So assessing is a big thing, absolutely. That's all I have, I think, at the moment.
Thank you. Just as many of you are from different parts of the state, he referred to ITRS. From some of your communities, they may call it ADAPT, but it's similar programs and what they do and their collaboration with DHS. So next, some of the other parties at the table for reviews are attorneys, and so with that perspective, in terms of parental progress, here's Mr. Lindsay Soto, and
well, thanks for having me first. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you folks, and I know many of you from the reviews. Told myself today, said, Lindsay, don't be nervous. You're a lawyer. You're used to talking to groups of people, rooms of people all the time. And then I responded, well, yeah, but they're usually sitting behind you, not in front of you. So maybe I'll just turn around and feel more comfortable that way. Well, I appreciate being invited by Sam, and Sam's an awesome person to have conducting the reviews. He always keeps people on time, so I'll make sure I try to do that today for him. So I put together this little PowerPoint presentation just to kind of organize my thoughts around these issues. How do we know what services DHS wants their parents to participate in? Well, there's lots of different ways to find that information. The basis of jurisdiction, obviously. What did the parent admit to? What was their hearing held, and if so, what did the judge find? I know this is kind of small, so I'll try to go through them. Action agreements. They have action agreements that they have to sign or that their caseworker provides them with, and it definitely encourages them to work on certain issues. For example, they need to be doing drug treatment. They need to be doing domestic violence counseling, lots of different things that they need to be doing. So evaluations. There's lots of different evaluations that they have them do, psychological evaluations, psychosexual in some cases, drug and alcohol, domestic violence evaluations, treatment recommendations from providers. So Mr. Herb was just describing to you what happens in their process, and I think that is definitely helpful. Sometimes you'll see a treatment provider who maybe has an idea of something else that might be helpful to a parent rather than just listening to what the DHS worker says, and that can be helpful as well because those people are seeing our clients most of the time more often than the DHS worker sees them. Sometimes they see them for 2-3 groups a week. They have the mentors who are there on the ground with them. DHS caseworkers, they have lots of cases. They have lots of clients. They have lots of children they have to keep track of. And so it's more difficult for them to have that, frequent interaction with the parents and see what they might benefit from. Requirements of probation and probation officers. Sometimes the parents will actually suggest services that they need. They'll say, okay, I think I need mental health counseling. I feel like I need medication for my depression, et cetera. Things that are suggested by them, I think we need to take into consideration. I don't necessarily believe that those things need to be in action agreements because I think that's the person telling you, here's what I think I would benefit from, but not necessarily something we should require them to do. I've had clients who've done that before, and I always encourage them not to put that on their action agreements because then they've just got one more thing that the agency is looking at them to do. I think if they're telling you they need to participate in it, that's fine for you to refer them to a service, but not necessarily for them to be required to participate in it. And then sometimes there's 333s or other case planning documents where you'll find the services that somebody needs to participate in. So I put these together. These are, I think, most of the areas in which you'll find jurisdiction. Drug abuse, mental health, physical or sexual abuse, dirty house or a lack of housing, failure to meet the child's needs in some form or fashion, criminal history / incarceration. They haven't had a relationship with the child or they've had previous DHS history. And somewhere in one of those, I guess you could sort of put exposure of the child to somebody who's inappropriate, which I guess would sort of be failure to meet the child's needs or protect the child from something. So let's start off with drugs. One of the things that I look at, if I'm the child's attorney especially, is how quickly did the parent set up their evaluation? Is that something that they did on their own, or is it something that they needed the DHS worker to refer them to? When I see a client who does all that stuff by themselves, I always think, okay, this person is on top of it. They really are motivated to get their kids back. And that's something, when I'm the child's attorney, I appreciate too, is okay, this parent is going out of their, they're not just waiting for DHS to do everything for them. They are going above and beyond and being proactive in what is they know is going to be necessary to get their children placed back in their care. Sometimes you do see the parents who don't do that, and it doesn't necessarily mean they shouldn't get their kids back. It just means it's obviously going to take longer for that to happen. What level of treatment is recommended if they did an assessment? I think that's also important. Obviously, if they're level 1, you probably would have an easier time, returning a child to them than if they're a higher level. If they need to go many times a week. How is the parent's attendance in treatment? Are they there all the time? Not making excuses, Mr. Hurd said. I mean, our clients are among the sickest group of people you'll ever meet, and I don't mean that in the perverse sort of way. I mean that in they're always sick. I get sick too. I make it to work. I get all my stuff done. So realistically, I don't find that to be a real good excuse unless you can have it documented by a doctor. They went to the doctor. They got this information from the doctor that shows that they actually were sick and were unable to do anything on that day. And again, I mean, we all get sick, but we don't get sick for months at a time. We don't get sick 6 times in 2 months, generally speaking. So from the child's attorney's perspective, I think you need to take a careful look at that. Participation. Are they just going to the groups? And I think that's where you get into the whole jumping through the hoops versus actually making change. Is the treatment provider saying, yes, they're here, check, check, check? Or are they saying they're here, check, they're participating, check, they're giving feedback to other people, check, they're offering to help out other people in treatment? Those are the things you want to look at in terms of seeing whether they're actually motivated to change or whether they're just jumping through the hoops. What kind of feedback does the parent get from treatment providers? That basically goes back to what I just said. Is the parent showing up for UAs? Same thing. I'm not real tolerant of excuses for that. They can call and get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and call that hotline. So realistically, if they're not making time in the next 9 hours to go do a UA, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for that, especially as a child's attorney. As the parent's attorney, obviously there are other factors that come into that for me, but I would say most of the time your client should be calling. And what I always tell my clients to do is to make a list for every month. Make a list from day 1 to day 31, and have a line for what time you call, and then what the color of the day is, and that way you can document it. You're not going to remember 2 weeks later what whether you called on a specific day, so it's good to have those records. I have had mistakes happen. I had a person have a test that was mixed up with someone else's. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And this person was really adamant that they didn't use, and it turns out that they didn't use, so be careful of that. But the overwhelming majority, I think, are correct. Are they providing valid and negative samples? Also, consider treatment courts for them. Drug court, if they have a criminal case that involves some sort of drug. Also, I'm a little biased, but I'm the lawyer for the Fostering Attachment Treatment Court here in Marion County, and that's another court that I find is very helpful to people. It provides wraparound support services for them to be able to successfully reintegrate their child or children into their home. Mental health, cognitive issues. If they have a psychological, I always encourage my people to get psychologicals early on, because what ends up happening is you wait a while, and then eventually the agency wants you to do it, and then you have to schedule the appointment with the doctor, and they have to wait for the report to come back, and by then, you're 2 or 3 months down the road from where you were. So if it comes up, I always, as the parent's attorney, encourage them to do it, but obviously, if there's not necessarily a basis of jurisdiction related to that, the court may or may not order it. I find that the courts are generally pretty liberal in ordering those and try to tie it into the case plan. Mental health assessments, you can get those done more quickly, so I'd say that could be a recommendation. Maybe do the mental health assessment first, for example, and see if the person who's doing that assessment thinks a psychological is necessary. How quickly, again, you'll see this is a theme. How quickly did the parent engage in counseling if it's deemed necessary? Did they sit around and wait for the caseworker to provide them with a list of names? Did they need hand-holding by the caseworker to do this, or did they call? Did they go through the phone book and call all these counselors to see whether they could get in to them? And again, if the caseworker provides them a list, that's fine, but what do they do with the list? Do they make the calls that same day? Do they let it sit on their desk and not use it? Sorry, maybe they don't have a desk. Do they let it sit on their table and not do anything with it for weeks? That's not a good sign. Attendance is a huge factor, but so is insurance coverage. So realistically, a lot of our clients don't have insurance. Keep an eye on that. DHS sometimes will pay for their counseling, so I think getting that answer from DHS relatively early is important. Are you willing to pay for it? If you are, I mean, what I've seen is they sort of pay for sessions, and they'll pay for 10 sessions, and they'll pay for another 10, pay for it in groups, and that's helpful to people, but it's not always possible. What's the feedback from the counselor? Is the person coming? Are they really dedicated to making change, or are they just showing up and really not talking and not discussing any of the issues that brought them to the counselor? Are the services being offered in a manner that best suits the parent's cognitive abilities, based on their either the experience with the caseworker or the psychological evaluation, whatever information you have? Are the services being offered to them in a way they can understand? If they can't understand it, it's not really going to do them very much good. Physical or sexual abuse, this one's pretty obvious, but it can be against the child or another person. Has the parent done a psychological or psychosexual evaluation or domestic violence assessment? Can the parent afford to pay for treatment? Same thing. The problem that you run into here is most of the treatment providers say, we want the parent to pay for the treatment. That's part of their accountability. That's fine. Well, maybe DHS then can help the parent pay for rent in exchange for the parent paying for their treatment. There's ways to be creative around this, and I find that most caseworkers aren't as creative as I'd like them to be in that. DHS can help them maybe pay for something else, and then the person can directly pay the provider for the domestic violence treatment. Is the parent participating in treatment, internalizing change? Same thing as we've been through before. Is the parent just showing up to the DV classes? Are they going to solutions and sitting there? Or are they actually opening up and saying, here's what I've done, here's the way, I don't want to do this anymore, that type of stuff. And feedback from the provider, again, is important. Parenting classes in cases of inappropriate discipline. Is the person going to parenting classes? Are they applying the skills that they've learned in the parenting class in their visits with their children? Dirty house, lack of housing. How quickly did the parent clean up the house? Most of the times, the parents clean up the house before we even get to the shelter hearing. That's a good sign. If the person says, well, I need to get a dumpster, and they're making a lot of excuses for not being able to do it, cleaning up a house is easy to do. If you have to throw stuff outside, that's fine. Most people can do that. It shows a lot of motivation. I think you're going to get a good read on whether they're motivated if they clean the house quickly. Can the parent maintain cleanliness? I had a case where we would stop by the house unannounced when the parent didn't have the children, and the house was dirty. If you have 3 children added to that, and your house is dirty without the 3 children, how in the world are you going to keep it clean with those 3 kids involved? So that's one of the things I always try and do that. As the child's attorney, go and check out their house before the kids come home and see how clean it is, if that's an issue. Work on finding housing should be early in the case, but timing is also important. So, for example, you don't necessarily want to have the parents spending all this money on rent for a place if they're not going to get the kids back relatively soon. So you kind of want to be careful about that until, we always tell our clients, talk to the caseworker about finding housing right now, because finding a house may not be the best thing for you, may not be the best use of your money. Failure to meet the child's needs can be failure to thrive, failure to provide many things: education, nutrition, hygiene. It's harder to evaluate, and it's very hard to change too. It's really difficult to say, okay, well, I wasn't meeting my child's needs, but now I will. So it's difficult to tell if the person really will do that. It is often related to the cleanliness of the home. Looking at parent-child interactive therapies, that's something that we have in Marion County at least. I know it's probably some places else, some other places too, but here we really have a focus on it, and that's very helpful. I find with most of the parents that I am their lawyer, I think that it's very helpful to them, and it's also helpful for the children as well. Family counseling is often helpful to reinforce the parent's belief regarding the issues. I had one case where the mom was sort of in denial about some sex abuse that had happened, and they were encouraging her to meet with the older teenage child to kind of say, look, here's what happened. It is legitimate. You need to understand that this did happen to your sister, et cetera. The ISRIS services, the in-home services from options that happen generally after the children return now. How's the parent doing? Is the parent actually participating in the service, or are they just letting the person come over and tell them what to do? Are they applying what the worker is telling them to what they're working with their child? Criminal history incarceration, not really any services to offer there. It's kind of like, okay, you've been in trouble in the past, stay out of trouble now. There is a True Thought class that's offered, I think, through ITRS that's very helpful to a lot of my clients. If the parent can't stay out of jail when they don't have their kids, do you think they're going to stay out of jail when they do? Probably not. So that person's probably not a very stable option. Does the parent recognize how their incarceration affects the child's stability? That's another thing to look at when you're thinking about returning a child to that person. Are they recognizing that? If they don't have a relationship with the child, have they paid child support? Has the absent parent, have they had ways to contact the children over the years and haven't done it? Or has the person with the children moved around and not been available to be there for them? Does the child want contact with that person? That's also an important consideration. DHS history, real quickly. I don't put a lot into this. I think that people can change, especially as a parent's attorney. But at the same time, you need to be looking at what were the reasons why they were in care before. Have they really changed since that time? And we talked a little bit about this, but do they have work obligations that prevent them from fully participating? Do they have financial limitations? Lack of transportation, I find that that's not really much of an issue unless they're out in an area that doesn't have bus service. Most of the time they have, they have bus passes that they give you to get to the services. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present this, and I'll hand it over to Judge Orr.
Whoa, that was a lot of information in a short time. Good job. So, well, good morning. And as I'm one of the few people that actually on many days gets to be a lawyer and a judge on the same day, because I retired from the bench in Jackson County after 14 years, but then decided, I knew when I left the bench that I wanted to stay involved with children and foster care issues and those kinds of things. So I did take a job with the Judicial Department, and for 2 years was a juvenile court improvement program attorney, and now am working half-time since I'm now officially retired and receiving my PERS. So I'm really happy to be with you this morning. One bad thing about going last is that a lot of what I was going to say has already been said by others. But one good thing is that as they were talking, it brought up more things that maybe I could comment on when they were done. And I think one of the things, most of us, I'm willing to bet that all of us in this room who are parents have pretty high standards for how we are as parents. And I think the tendency is to judge other parents by the standards that we hold for ourselves. And I just want to emphasize that the law says that the standard we're to use in judging these parents that are involved in the dependency system is, are they minimally adequate? Minimally adequate. Now, we might not like that, but that's the law. And that's what we have to be looking at. So I often, cases where particularly children have been in foster care for a while, sometimes parties seem to think that it's a contest between the best interest of the child. Is it better for them to be in foster care or better for them to be with a parent? And that's really not the test. The test is, can the parent be minimally adequate? So just keep that in mind. In looking at safety, we always have to try to remember that safety of the child, and looking at parent progress, that safety of the child is the paramount concern. That's by statute, and that's good. So I want to talk a little bit about where really evaluating parental progress for me as a judge comes into play, particularly is in the permanency hearings that we hold about a year, 12 to 14 months after a child's been in care. And I just want to say the court can implement a concurrent plan that is different from what's being recommended by child welfare. Where that gets to be really problematic, however, and I ran into this quite a few times, is where I was at the point as a judge that, to me, the permanency plan should be adoption, and child welfare wasn't there. And you can't really force it as a judge, is what I found out. I ended up with the Department of Justice coming in and saying, well, Your Honor, we don't think we have a case ethically. I can't proceed, but I can't tell you why we don't have a case, because it's attorney-client privilege between child welfare and me as their lawyer. And a couple of times I was able to get them to agree they would divulge that information to the child's attorney, and then sort of, bypass having to actually know what advice had been given to them by the Department of Justice, their attorney for the TPR. So, but let's see. Also, when you get to a permanency hearing and are trying to determine where the case is going to go at that point, occasionally I've had child welfare come in and ask for an extension because child welfare had not done what they needed to do, and they needed the extension. And I just need to say that is not the grounds for an extension of a plan. It is for the parent or not. It is to evaluate parental progress at that point. We're not holding up, changing a plan because of progress or not by the agency. All right, so the parental, let's see, the extension, if you get to the initial permanency hearing, and I as a judge think that further work by the parent could result in reunification within a reasonable period of time, which by law is to be measured through the eyes of the child, what's reasonable for the child, then I am required to set a specific time frame and designate what that parent is supposed to accomplish within that time frame. Any goals, as you know, and has been covered by others, have to be tied to the jurisdictional basis for the allegations that were in the petitions that we're dealing with. So I told some folks yesterday, encourage them as CRB members, if you see cases where additional issues have come up as parents are progressing that are not addressed in jurisdictional issues, recommend that the court do something to order that an amended petition be filed so that you can legally require services that are necessary. You know, the Adoption and Safe Families Act says we have about 12 months to work with parents, 12 to 14 months, depending on the situation. And I just want to remind you that sometimes if parents are just doing nothing, judges will often order early permanency hearings, so that's not always the case. And I found myself doing that primarily with reentry cases where we had worked with parents and multiple children, and then they're back and they're doing nothing after about 6 months. So that would be an appropriate time for the CRB to recommend to the judge that an early permanency hearing might be set. In trying to evaluate parental progress myself, quite frankly, as a judge, I'm relying on the parties and the service providers to really do the essence of parental assessment. I actually am quite envious. I was hearing last night at dinner conversation about, oh my gosh, we have 5 CRB hearings in one afternoon. And I turned to who I was sitting next to and said, wow, you know, we have 20, 30 hearings in an afternoon in court. And so I just tell you that to emphasize you have so much more time to try to gather information as CRB members than judges do in court. And so we really rely on you to do that. And so that's why your assessment of parental progress as well is really helpful, because you really do have the time to go into that much more detail during hearings than most courts around the state that I know or that I've gone to. And actually that's one of the sort of fun things I'm doing right now as a retired judge, is traveling around the state and filling in. And it's been really interesting to see how different courts do these things. I think we've really covered. It's not just did a parent complete. I hate it when I get things like parent completed drug and alcohol treatment. Well, what does that mean? So I really, you know, I think it's helpful perhaps sometimes to even encourage that others work with the treatment providers to give the detail that the court and you as CRB members are going to need to really make an honest evaluation of parental progress. Let me look through my notes. I think it's really important that we all educate ourselves about issues that bring parents before the court. And the primary issues involved, I think we all sort of know this intuitively, but really the primary issues that we usually have presented are drug and alcohol and domestic violence issues and mental health issues. And I think that it's really important that we try to educate ourselves as much about those treatments that are available, the dynamics involved, and also cognitive functioning issues, because that's those cases to me are always the heartbreakers. The parents who really love their children but cognitively just cannot parent them. In Jackson County, where I was on the bench, we were blessed to have both what's called a mom's program and a dad's program, and now there's a housing for parents where if child welfare comes in, parents can actually go with their children where there's 24-hour supervision and services instead of being torn away from their parents. And so check it out, and if you don't have that in your community, I'd really encourage you to try to get involved in a similar effort. somebody talked about return home. I just need to say return home, I came to learn, is an incredibly stressful time. Particularly if the kids have been out of the home for any significant period of time. And I learned that lesson because I also did a dependency treatment court for quite a few years. And we thought it would just be really cool to reunite kids at Christmas. Oh, wow. I finally decided we would never reunify children at the Christmas season. It is such a stressful time for parents who are in recovery, and then you put on top of that all of the stuff we have around Christmas season in our society. And it was really hard. So last, I agree with Lindsay. I want to put in a plug for treatment courts. I found treatment courts to be the most meaningful thing that I did as a judge and the most effective thing that I did as a judge. You really get to know the parents when they're coming to court every week, and you're meeting in teams with the treatment providers and getting information. And, so I would really encourage you, if you have a dependency treatment court in your jurisdiction, to really try to encourage parents to participate in that. So I think that I've pretty much covered and filled up my time. And so I will just say, I was saying familiarize yourself with treatment services. And one way, I'll give you just an example. I've had a dear family member who was an addict. So I've been to lots of meetings, 12-step meetings. I've tried to educate myself about drug and alcohol issues. And so one way when parents come in and they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm going to this 12-step programs. And so I'll say, how long you been going? Oh, 3 months. And I'll say, what's the first step? And they can't tell me. I know there's a problem with parental progress. So the more you can educate yourself with the requirements of the services, then that's a way to question the parent about their progress and really sort of get an idea. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll have a period of questions and answers, and that was a great segue to one of the questions that we had, which is during reviews, what questions would you like us to ask that we don't typically ask? And perhaps that could be one of them. What's the first step? But additionally, what other questions could be asked that you don't see boards normally asking, or that you think would be really helpful to ask? Panelists?
Anybody? Be sure and ask about the needs of the child. When we're evaluating parental progress, it's not in a vacuum. It's, can this parent parent this child? And as you know, so many of these children have really, they've got trauma issues, emotional issues, et cetera, which makes it even more difficult. But when it gets to TPR or even to permanency hearing, those special needs of the child have to be documented and have to be tied to the parental ability in a very specific way. So that's an area that I would really encourage you to emphasize and try to make that link between the needs of this child and the ability of this parent.
I think, is this on? Oh, yes, it is. I guess one of the questions that, and it kind of piggybacks on that too, is the visitation, I'm going to use the word detrimental to the child. We always push for that. Of course, that's important. Children and parents need to stay connected, but there are times in situations where I have cases right now where we have children that, again, highest level of care, and we're finally getting 89% compliance of what the treatment is. And these are children that for 4 years have shown no progress. Parents slipped out for 2 months. There was no visits. And it wasn't because we didn't want visits. The parents stepped out. And all of a sudden we see this huge improvement with the child. And so I guess I really want you to look at, and I try to provide the visitation notes on that. So really looking at, again, not just let's keep everybody together desperately trying to keep them together, because when I first started, I thought so too. There's no way that this could be detrimental if you structured it, if you took them out and you monitored it and you assisted with it. And unfortunately, that's not the case. The next day you have 5 days of holds, physical restraints, more medication needed. So again, stepping back and looking at, again, the process of, is this always in the best interest of the child? The parent is going, I really want, or the parent's attorneys, or the judge. And again, those are things that we want to have happen, but is it in the best interest of the child?
The thing I think of is if CRB members could ask the parents more questions about what are they learning, and that kind of piggybacks on what Judge Orff said. What if they say they're going to counseling? If you can try to find out from them what they're learning in regards to what brought the children into care, because so often, unfortunately, parents are going to counseling, but they're not working on anything related to the issues at hand. But yet we'll have therapists say they're making wonderful progress, but they can't articulate what that progress is about. So that will help you find out from parents really what kind of progress they're making in regards to the issue at hand.
Okay, so
Oh, Gary does.
Okay.
To me, one question is real, it's a pretty basic question, it's real simple. Why are you here? So many times you'll hear, you can get a good assessment of where they're at with what's going on. You just simply, why are we all here? Why are you here right now? Well, DHS took my kids. Well, that tells you volumes. Or it's because I victimize the rights and feelings of my kids. I victimize the rights and feelings of other people, and I just can't stay clean. And you can get a whole another volume of things going on there. So I think the questions can be pretty simple. You can get a lot of information.
the next question is, sometimes psychological evaluations are recommended fairly early in the case, and so the question is, how is that impacted by substance abuse? You know, is that found to be?
I know. And that is actually an issue for us, because with most of the providers, if I have a parent who just relapsed and used meth, how useful is that information going to be? They're already they're in recovery. We know they're in recovery, but part of the recovery is relapse. And depending on the drug of choice, if you're looking at meth, the time frame could be longer, the length of time that they've been on it. You know, again, I look at psychologicals, any type of psychological, neuropsychs, psychosexuals. It's just that small snapshot. And it does give us an idea of where they are. It's also as good as the information that you provide the provider, the questions that you ask the provider. What do you want to know from this parent? And so to me, I think that psychologicals, there is a time frame for it, but again, after building a rapport with a parent, and really looking at their needs, because again, not the same type of evaluation works for every single parent. And so yeah, sometimes I know there's a benefit in the beginning of having that, but I think that you have to really get in and understand the case, because you don't have the questions to ask in the beginning. And you're spending a lot of money on something that could be detrimental to the parent, because maybe they did use, or they're on prescription meds. There's a lot of issues that I think are taken in consideration. But unfortunately for some of the psychologists, when they get my referral packet, I've been told it's rather lengthy, because I want as much information, and I may not have that information. It may take a couple of months, or the parent may have been involved in numerous amount of institutions or treatment providers. So I think that just quickly getting that done is not always in the best interest. Now, if this is short, if there's some really serious issues, sex abuse, a child fatality, then I think there is a basis for that earlier, getting that information, because we know that the judge is going to be looking at in 6 and 9 months, and we better be ready, because it may take 3 weeks. I've had 6 months that it's taken to get an evaluation back, and that's not fair to hold that up. But again, in all fairness to the parent, you need to give them that opportunity to make some of those changes, and then when they sit down with the psychologist to really come up in that part with a workable plan. So I think that's case specific on that.
There's a lot of pros and cons to psychological evaluations, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I just want to say that if a parent has a long history of drug abuse, often there's underlying mental health issues that need to be addressed. And so I'm not sure how we get to that when they're continuing to use. I think that if they have that long history, my opinion is that we should go ahead and send them to the psychologist, letting the psychologist know that they may be under the influence, because we want to get to the root of the problem. And sometimes we just don't have all the answers without a psychological evaluation.
My view is a little different, I suppose. I think if you've got somebody that's using, and especially if they have a long history, I think you need to have at least 30 plus days to be able to get at least to get some type of a snapshot picture of what maybe they're looking at. You can have some folks that come in there that appear to have some pretty hefty mental health stuff going on, some depression, some this, that, one, the other thing. It's amazing once they get clean how a lot of that clears up. So I think it's important to do that. There are times, though, absolutely, they just can't get 2 days back to back clean. So it's like, what do you do? Well, there's times that the mental health may take precedence over that, which is always a common question: which came first, mental health or addiction? So yeah.
Just quickly to say, I did have a psychologist tell me that who worked in a residential treatment program where people were there sometimes for a year, just remark about the difference in a psychological that was done the first month people were there, and then they did a follow-up 12 months down, and sometimes it was almost like 2 different people. So just beware that timing of a psychological could really make a difference in the evaluation.
Staying on that theme, one of the comments was when there are multiple psychological evaluations done, and often with different findings, the car rate, could you comment on that? So what do you do with that when you have those different?
I'll just start from a judge perspective. It's the duel of the experts. And it's really difficult. We as judges are supposed to decide which expert we most rely on, and sometimes it's really hard. So I can't give you any real tips on how you balance that other than just trying to do your best.
I agree completely. I mean, there's times it's like reports are all saying different. I mean, as far as treatment services, we treat addiction. We treat lifestyles or the lack thereof. We treat those kinds of things, and that's our area. So hopefully mental health, hopefully the other folks, and then we can all sit down and collaborate and say, okay, here's what we're doing.
To be a little more helpful, things I'm going to look at, or what was the timing that this was done? Was the person clean? And what information did the psychologist have? And what assumptions were they making? I did, as an attorney, once have a psychologist who admitted that he was biased against cognitively limited parents. So, I mean, those kind of factors you can try to flesh out by questioning.
My suggestion is to have the defense attorney and the agency agree on the psychologist, because that way you don't get the duel of the experts as much. And I mean, we use Dr. Cook all the time because I think he's very fair. So when we use him, we say, okay, whatever comes out of it, I tell my clients, whatever comes out of it, you need to do, because he's not going to he's not going to be unreasonable in what he recommends. So that's one way to do it. Sometimes there are the clients who want an additional psychological evaluation, and that makes it very difficult, but obviously timing is important. So that's something to consider.
One second. I know there are many questions, but we're on a timeline, and we'll get to additional questions at the end of the presentation.
Oh, yeah, and that's actually I was going to talk about too. What I found, because I have a couple parents who we've had for 4 or 5 years into the system, and when I look back and I pull all the files, which I tend to do when I get the case, and look at all of the information, start from scratch, and I'll see 6 or 7 different diagnoses. Again, depending on their on what's going on, whether they're using or not, the type of testing that's done. When we're looking at personality disorders, were certain types of testing. Did we look at what the parent's cognitive functioning is? Is that play a role in it? There's a big difference between looking at a mental health assessment and a psychiatric or a psychological evaluation. How long has that person worked with that? If I have somebody who's been working with this client for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and they've seen them over a period of time, I might look at a little bit more of what they have to say, opposed to the person who walked in and in 30 minutes or an hour had a diagnosis. And also what the information that they give is incredibly important. How many people that they're allowed to talk to get collateral information is really important. But again, I look at parents that are low cognitive functioning, and we are doing drawing a blank on all the testing that we do that goes along with that. If that may not be a fair assessment. Again, if I've got a parent that has MR, that is diagnosed as mentally retarded, I'm not going to get some of that validity on that test. And that's a huge part. I am lucky enough to work with New Solutions and MB-RAP, and we sit down as a panel, a team, and look at all of those different assessments, because again, there is some validity in some, or when you get something where there's so much inaccuracy, it's really hard to accept that as gospel, that this is a fair assessment of this parent. So.
And we have time for one last question, and perhaps this one is for Mr. Soto. Often parents' attorneys tell their clients not to engage in services until court ordered, which seems to be contradictory to assessing motivation and...
Okay. I absolutely disagree with that. And I disagree with telling our clients not to participate in services. And here's the way I look at it is if you start participating in services and then at some point, I mean, we're basically, the service is an evaluation. The service is an evaluation to determine whether you need additional services. So nobody just walks in and says, okay, you need drug treatment, go show up. Or, okay, you need mental health. Well, mental health counseling is probably a little bit different. But, okay, you need domestic violence treatment, go to the domestic violence class. There's an assessment that's designed for that purpose. So I always encourage my clients to do it. You know, if they're obviously they're very resistant to doing it, saying that what the information that's here is not accurate, that may be different, and we may say, okay, well, we'll have this hearing, and after the hearing, the judge is going to rule whether you actually need to do this or not. If the judge rules this, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. But I'd say most of my clients are willing to engage in the services because they know that it will help them get their children back, and they're willing to at least do that evaluation to see whether the professional person who's doing the evaluation thinks that they need the additional treatment.
Thank you. I'm sure there are additional questions. Please write them on the cards. And as we continue with the presentation after the break, we'll try and answer as many as we can. So we'll have a 15-minute break. But before we break, please welcome me and thanking our panelists for taking the time to